Some of the most successful designers in the world have a good understanding of fabric and how to use them to their advantage. This understanding and knowledge of textiles is key for the designer to make their designs and visions come to life, exactly as it was intended. Unfortunately, without it, the best designs on paper will remain that way, on paper. And that is not what we want. So join me as we learn how to bring our designs to life. Hello and a warm welcome to your Lesson 6 of Module 2 of your Professional Diploma in Fashion Design with Show Academy. I am so excited that you have decided to join me today to explore the interesting world of fashion. Today we are going to explore fabric orientation a bit before we look at the different textile construction techniques. We are also going to discuss the different fabric properties, what each one means, and how to use this to source for the perfect fabric for your design. Since we are talking about this lesson's objectives, let's take a quick look at your skills progression since we have not done it in a while. Guys, can you believe how far you have come? The empty circles like CAD, range board, and the pattern and garment construction skills will be the focus of Module 3 and 4. I don't know if you have noticed, but with every lesson the content gets more challenging. That is why some of the more challenging skills are still empty. But this gives you more reason to continue with the classes because these are really valuable skills to have. Welcome to Lesson 6, titled Facing the Fabric. I hope you enjoy this lesson. Just like reading a map, planning a garment design requires the designer to describe the fabric in terms of placement and direction. Let's look at the grain line. The grain line direction greatly influences the performance of the fabric in the garment silhouette. Do you remember what a grain line is? Grain lines on the fabric guide the designer as to how to use the fabric's characteristics to their advantage. Both woven fabrics and knits have different grain lines. These are the straight grain, cross grain, and bias grain. You can see these different directions in the image, but in the following images it will include a pattern piece. This will help you when you need to place the pieces on the correct grain line, pin and cut out your pattern. The straight grain is considered the strongest direction of the fabric, which is best at resisting pulling and tearing. As you can see in the image, it is parallel to the selvage of the fabric. Designers often use this straight grain for strength and to keep the fabric close to the body. In woven fabrics, the straight grain is often referred to as the warp direction, but in knitted fabric it is called the straight grain. The direction of cross grain will provide a little ease or slight expansion of the fabric, which can accommodate normal body expansions such as walking, sitting, and even breathing. It is perpendicular to the selvage, as you can see in the image. Unlike the straight grain, the cross grain falls away from the body. In woven fabrics, the cross grain is also referred to as the weft or filling direction. In knitted fabrics, we just call it the cross grain. The bias grain is the most creative grain line because it can cause the fabric to become stretchable, flexible, and super drapey. This grain line is always at a 45-degree angle from the straight grain line and is the only diagonal grain line used in pattern making. Bias grain lines cause the fabric to flare away from the body in very interesting ways. Both woven and knitted fabrics use the term bias grain. The selvage is not a grain line, but can be used to determine it. Do you guys remember what the term selvage describes? The selvage is the finished edge of woven fabric. The edge of knitted fabric can either be a cut edge or, similar to woven fabric's edge. In both woven and knitted fabrics, the selvage helps to stabilize the edges of fabric for accurate cutting. Some fabrics have a different color yarn woven into the selvage to make it even more visible. When it comes to textiles, the term piece refers to the roll of fabric. Mass-produced fabric is rolled onto cardboard tubes, usually in 50 or 100 yard or meter quantities. Don't worry if you go into a shop and ask to buy a piece of fabric. This term is only used to refer to fabric for shipment. Fabric has two sides. The fabric side intended for the outside of the garment is called the face of the fabric, or the right side of the fabric. The side of the fabric intended for the inside of the garment is called the back of the fabric, or the wrong side. There are a couple of ways to determine the right and wrong side of the fabric. If the fabric has a colorful pattern on it, the wrong side will appear more dull and less bright compared to the face of the fabric. Also look at the color. One side will be brighter than the other. Of course, the bright side will then be the face of the fabric. Of course, not all fabric has patterns on it, which makes it a little more challenging, but try and look in the light to determine which side is prettier. With that being said, there is no official rule that says you have to choose the right side. Sometimes the wrong side of the fabric is just as pretty, if not prettier, than the face of the fabric. In fact, many designers use the wrong side of the fabric. Sometimes they use it in combination with the face of the fabric to create contrast in design. Apart from the face of the fabric, knowing the top and bottom of fabric will assist in determining the orientation of the garment pattern pieces being cut. You should know the nap direction of a brushed or cut pile fabric. In this case, napping has nothing to do with sleep. Instead, it is the term used to describe the textured surface of a fabric determined by the direction of its raised fibers. Why is it important to know the nap of your fabric? A fabric with nap appears differently depending on its orientation because its fibers lie in a uniform direction. Fabrics without a nap appears the same regardless of its orientation. There are certain fabrics that will always have a nap due to the nature of their manufacturing process. These fabrics are often known for their sheen and plush texture, and these include, but are not limited to, fleece, corduroy, velour, flannel, fur or faux fur, and velvet. It is important to be able to tell the difference between fabrics with and without nap. The visual effect may be subtle, but there are several methods to determine whether a fabric has nap. The following two methods will help you determine this. Touch is your first method. Run your hand slowly and gently over the fabric in one direction and then the other. If the fabric has nap, the fibers will feel smooth in one direction and slightly rougher in the opposite direction. When it feels smooth, it is the direction of the nap, also referred to as the downwards direction. When it feels rougher, it is against the nap, and this is known as the upward direction. Light is the second method. Take your fabric into the sunlight. Again, run your hand over the fabric slowly and gently in one direction. Observe whether the fabric appears lighter, darker, or the same. Also run your hand over the fabric in the opposite direction. Observe whether the fabric appears lighter, darker, or the same in this direction. If there is a difference in light based on the direction you ran your hand, then the fabric has nap. The lighter color you observed indicates that you ran your hand in the direction of the nap. Also, as we know, is the downward direction. The darker color then is when you ran your hand against the direction, the upward direction of the nap. If there is no difference in light based on the direction you ran your hand, then the fabric does not have nap. Since nap should always face in the same direction, nap is important in determining the layout of your pattern pieces on the fabric. When cutting your fabric, all the pattern pieces should be placed with the nap going downwards towards the hem to create the sheen. If you ignore the nap when cutting out your pattern pieces, you will see the difference in nap direction when garment is sewn together. This will make your garment look very odd because of the different shades. Unfortunately, because the pattern can only be cut out in one direction, you will need more fabric to construct the garment, which will make it more expensive. You will also waste more fabric due to all the offcuts. You will also have to take into consideration the layout of your pattern when the fabric has a print. Just like fabrics with nap, all the pattern pieces must be cut in the same direction. Determine the top of the fabric, like on this image, and this will direct the layout. The top of this image is quite obvious. If you flip it upside down, then the animals would not be walking, but they would be floating in the jungle. So you need to take into consideration what is the top and the bottom. You also need to take into consideration matching lines or stripes if you use a stripe pattern. Matching prints and stripes really influence the overall quality of your end product. So now we are going to look at the construction of fabrics. In our last textile theory lesson, we looked at what a textile is, what it is made from, and the textile production process. Before we get into different textile construction methods, let's first do a little recap. Do you remember what a textile is? It is a two-dimensional, flexible surface that is transformed into a three-dimensional form through the vision of the designer. Now I am going to give you a definition and you need to decide which term this definition belongs to. This is the basic building blocks of a textile. Is it the source, like the animal, plant, or chemical? The fiber, or is it the yarn? The fiber is the basic building blocks of a textile, and there are two different types, the staple and the filament strands. Do you remember those? So what is the yarn then? The yarn is the continuous strand produced from the various fibers that are interlaced or looped together to create the two-dimensional fabric, and that is exactly what we are going to look at today. The process between yarn to fabric. Knowledge of why and how a fabric behaves during the design process is often rooted in understanding the construction of the fabric. While the fiber and the yarn will help determine the hand, so how it feels, and the drape of the fabric, the overall performance of that fabric depends on how the fiber or the yarn is used during the construction and finishing phase. Fabric is produced in one of three ways: massing, weaving, and knitting. First up, we have massing. It is created from massing fibers together without the need for producing yarns first. An easy way to remember this: massing equals fiber to fabric. This requires an understanding of a fiber's characteristics and what will hold the fibers together to form a two-dimensional surface. Methods of massing include, but are not limited to, the shrinking, the melting, or tangling of the fibers together. Some examples of massing fabrics are felt, which are created mostly from wool fibers. The cool thing about this fabric is that it can hold its form and can be shaped with pressure and steam. Unfortunately, with most massing fabrics, it has poor strength and is prone to shrinkage. Wet-laid fabrics, which are created with staple fibers. This is a great example of creating something out of waste because it uses all the spinning mill waste and any other low-quality fibers to create a new textile. The water used during this process is reclaimed and reused. Unfortunately, due to its properties, this fabric is rarely used in fashion design. Spunbound fabrics are created by melting oil-based filament fibers, often used as interlining in garments. Next up is weaving. Weaving requires yarn production first. Weaving fabric is accomplished on a loom by interlacing 2 or more yarns at right angles. So, the warp yarns, which is the straight grain, runs parallel to the selvage, and the weft yarns, or cross grain, runs perpendicular to the selvage. It is this angular construction that distinguishes weaving from other fabric construction methods. Due to this method, woven fabrics are rigid with very little stretch. The 4 main weave structures commonly used are plain weave, basket weave, twill weave, and Saturn weave. In plain weave, each yarn is interlaced with every other yarn as demonstrated in the image. There are no floating yarns and the surface has a subtle texture. There are also 2 types of plain weave. Balanced plain weave is constructed the way I just explained. Unbalanced or ribbed weave is created when a warp and weft yarn differ in size, and it may either be warp or weft dominant fabrics. These usually have a cross grain or diagonal ribbed texture. Some examples of balanced weave include burlap, chiffon, gingham, flannel, muslin, and voile, to name a few. There are quite a lot more. Examples of ribbed weave include crêpe de chine, poplin, and taffeta. Again, I am just naming a few. Basket weave is constructed when groups of warp and weft yarns are interlaced so that they form a simple crisscross pattern as seen in the image. It can be identified by its checkered appearance. Examples of basket weave fabrics include canvas, oxford, and sailcloth. Twill weave is recognized by the diagonal line texture on the surface of the fabric, which is created by floating over 2 or more yarns at regular intervals, like demonstrated in the image. Because of the diagonal surface texture, these fabrics are softer and more drapey than the plain, basket, and Saturn weave. Due to the floating over 2 to 4 yarns, this fabric is also considered the most durable, especially when using natural fibers like cotton, hemp, and flax. Examples of twill weave fabrics include herringbone, houndstooth, and denim. If you are wearing denim, look at it and check if you can see the diagonal lines. Here is a little fun fact for you. The name houndstooth comes from the fact that the pattern, as you can see in the image, resembles dogs' teeth, more specifically the larger teeth. Now, this is where the fact gets cute. While houndstooth is typically a small-scale pattern to begin with, you also get micro houndstooth. This smaller version of the pattern can be referred to as puppy tooth. How cute is that? Saturn weave is made up of randomly floating yarns over 5 or more yarns and is recognized by its shiny, smooth, and lustrous surface. Saturn weaves tend to be quite stiff, except when very fine and flexible yarns are used. Examples of Saturn weave fabrics are, well, it is in its name, satin. We also get charmeuse. Both of these are created with lustrous multi-filament yarns. And then we get sateen, which uses spun yarn, relying on the shiny floating yarns to create a lustrous and smooth surface. Next up is knitting. Knitting also requires yarn production, but unlike weaving, knitting can be done with 1 or more yarns creating stitches that are looped together to create the fabric. Because a greater variety of different yarns can be used when creating a knitted fabric, there are many different types of knitted fabrics. Yarns can be less strong than for weaving, allowing for a wide variety in yarn type for greater texture in knitted fabric. The advantages of knitted fabrics include faster production compared to weaving. The loop stitch construction makes knits softer and more drapey and easier to fit and move with the body. And it is more flexible in producing fabrics or garments, even seamless garments. The disadvantages include that they snag easily and they can stretch out of shape. There are 2 methods of producing knits, and these are weft knitting and warp knitting. Let's start with weft knitting. This is created by looping stitches in the cross-grain direction across the fabric. The arrangement of stitches will determine the name and the properties of the fabric. There are two different types of weft knitted fabric, single knit and double knit. Single knit can be produced as a tube of fabric. Examples include jersey and sweater knits. Double knit is stable even at the cut edges and can also be produced as a tube of fabric. An example of this is rib knits. And then we have warp knitting. Warp knitting is created by looping the stitches in the straight grain direction, parallel to the selvage edge. This is most used for lingerie and athletic clothing. Some examples of warp knitting include mesh, netting, and lace knit. These are not the only fabric construction methods, but the most popular ones when it comes to the creation of fashion textiles. Because fashion is ever-changing and evolving, the textile industry is constantly adapting to new trends, consumer shifts, and new technologies. There are some incredible things happening like plant-based leathers, wearable technology, and dry dyeing, but we will dedicate a whole lesson to the future of fashion. Do you live by the saying, less is more? Sometimes more is more when it comes to design. By adding design details like gathers, darts, folds, tucks, and pleats, it can transform any simple design into something interesting with visual impact. Join me for the next lesson where we will learn how to manipulate a basic pattern block to add in these details that will make your design stand out from the rest. Imagine this. You have an amazing idea. You create your flat sketch and your fashion illustration, and you turn it into a sewing pattern. The next step is to actually make it. But in order to do this, you need fabric. What is the most important component of a garment? Do you think it is the fit, the design, or the fabric? Although all of them are very important, the fabric is the most important component. It doesn't matter how amazing the design is and how well it is constructed. If the garment is made from the wrong fabric, it will not do the design justice. A poor design can be improved by a fantastic fabric, but a great design is hardly ever successful when constructed out of ill-suited fabric. The designer needs to know the properties of fabric and how best to use them when it comes to design, cutting, and constructing the garment. Let's take a look at the fabric properties so that we can source the perfect fabric for our design. When looking at the basic properties of fabric, there are certain features you need to consider, and these are performance, structure, stretch, drape, and volume. Fabrics are chosen for its performance and utility in relation to its function. When you think about it, functionality is probably the most important consideration. It doesn't matter how beautiful the garment is, if it can't fulfill its purpose and can't be worn, it really is useless. So, when thinking about the performance of your fabric, ask yourself, what will the garment be? What will the garment be used for, and when will the garment be worn? For example, if you are designing swimwear, you need a fabric that can stretch, does not hold a lot of water, and should be able to dry quickly. In this case, you should look at different stretch fabrics like lycra or spandex. If you are designing an evening dress, though, the requirements will be completely different, right? You will require a luxurious fabric like silk or satin, chiffon, and lace. You will also probably make use of beautiful trims, beads, and embellishments. It is evident that you need to know the qualities and properties of fabric in order to correctly select the one that will ensure a successful and beautiful design and, most importantly, a functional garment. Structure, which refers to the construction of the fabric, is important to consider when designing a garment as it will influence the shape, fit, and overall look of the garment. Structure can also mean the shape and exaggeration of a design. So instead of a jacket being drapey, it will have more structure like we see in this image. Again, fabrics that are dense or tightly woven will offer greater structure than lightweight and flimsy fabrics. But structure can also be achieved by manipulating the fabric by means of tailoring techniques such as seams, darts, boning, and padding. We often see the use of padding in structured garments, even in this one. Look at the shoulders. The structure was created by using shoulder pads. Along with these techniques, interfacing is also used to strengthen the fabric, often found in collars and jackets. Stretch fabrics allow the garment to fit the body without the use of tailoring, such as seams and darts. Due to this, it is one of the more popular fabrics among designers and also consumers because it is soft against the skin, making it more comfortable. Stretch fibers are frequently added to other fibers to improve the performance of that fabric, like stretch cotton and denim. There are two main types of stretch fabrics, and these are two-way stretch and four-way stretch. Two-way stretch either stretch in the warp direction or in the weft direction. The four-way stretch fabrics can extend in both directions, so lengthwise and crosswise, which creates better elasticity and makes it the perfect fabric for sportswear and swimwear. Stretch fabrics completely revolutionized the textile and fashion industry, and you can understand why by just looking at this image of a cotton t-shirt and stretched jeans. Unfortunately, stretch garments do tend to distort in areas such as the elbows, bust, the bum, and knees when we wear it, so please keep that in mind when you are designing. The next property is the weight of the fabric. So what is the weight? It is the fabric density, or yarn count, combined with the size of the yarn that determines the weight of the fabric. I know, it's quite a mouthful. Higher density fabrics have more yarn in a square inch or centimeter, making them more opaque. Lower density fabrics have fewer yarns in a square inch or centimeter, making them more sheer. So, in simpler words, it refers to the thickness, tightness, and weight of the fabric. And that is how we get the different fabric weights, light, medium, and heavy weight. Lower weights are more delicate and higher weights are more hard-wearing. Let's quickly look at the different weights. We have lightweight fabrics like organza, chiffon, voile, taffeta, and single jersey. We have medium weight fabrics, and those include velvet, sateen, and chambray. And we have heavyweight fabrics, which include wool, felt, denim, and twill. Obviously, there are many more, but if I have to name all of them, this lesson will never end. Fabric drape is not the same as fabric weight, but there is frequently a correlation between the weight and drape, but not always. So, what does the drape of fabric mean then? Drape refers to the fluidity or the stiffness of the fabric, which has an effect on how the fabric falls and creases, influencing what the garment will look like. Now, you can either get a high drape, often referred to as a good drape, or a low drape. This does not mean that the good drape is better than the low one, it just means that it has more fluidity. A high drape is very soft and flowy, meaning that it hangs straight down in many small folds. It also clings and takes the shape of the body, showing the form that is underneath. Good examples of fabric with high drape include chiffon, silk, and satin. On the other hand, fabrics with a low drape is quite stiff and rigid. It hangs down in fewer and wider folds and creases and has greater volume because of the stiff folds holding its own shape and structure. Denim and corduroy are a few of the fabrics that almost always have low drape. And then we have to look at volume. You will notice that fabric weight, drape, and volume are all friends with each other. Volume refers to the shape of the garment and the amount of space it takes up. Volume can be created in multiple ways. You can either use a medium to heavyweight fabric with low drape to create structured and stiff volume, or you can use larger amounts of thinner fabrics which can be pleated, gathered, or layered to create volume. When choosing a fabric, it is important to think of the silhouette and the ease, which, if you remember, is the space between the body and the garment. Also take into consideration how the fabric will behave when the body is in motion. For example, lightweight fabrics will float, flow, and catch the air, which is also a great way to create volume. When deciding on the fabric best suited for your design, the properties we have just discussed are the most important ones to consider, as this can make or break the garment. It has the power to actually influence your design. There are other properties to also consider though, but they play a minor role. These properties or other fashion factors are definitely important, but they don't have a significant impact on the structure of your design. Let's take a look at them. As we know by now, color, which refers to the hue, the value and intensity of the fabric, has a great influence on your design and the message that you are trying to convey. This, like almost all the other fabric factors, are also very trend-focused, something you need to take into consideration when designing. Also remember who your client is and which colors best suit their natural coloring. Making use of prints in design can be risky because consumers will either like it or not, but it can also be very successful and set you apart from other designers. Texture is super important as it can enhance a garment. Choose textures according to the performance of design. And also remember you can always mix and match colors, prints, and textures to create contrast in design, create emphasis, and overall an interesting visual. The next 3 points are less about design but more about the actual production of your garment. You need to take into consideration who your target market is and what they are willing to pay. This will definitely influence everything. You also need to decide whether you want to create a lot of stock, so mass produce your garments so that many people can wear it, or only create a few or even one-of-a-kind exclusive garments. This will influence your fabric choices too, as the fabric chosen from the start must be available in larger quantities for mass production. Do you understand that? The more you want to sell, the more you have to make, which means you need to buy more fabric. Market level again depends on your target market. Are you a couture designer? A ready-to-wear designer? This will influence the type of garment you are designing, the fabric, and the quality of the final garment. This is a good place to start, so ask yourself, who am I designing for? And what kind of designer do I want to be? Now that we have a better understanding of the fabric properties, let's look at some examples together to determine what kind of fabric should be used when looking at your sketch. So first, let's look at my little sketch of a mini skirt. In order to determine the fabric, you need to study your sketch and try figure out the fabric that will make the design come to life. So, if we look at the drape and the volume of the skirt, it looks more stiff than flowy. Do you agree? And with that straight waistband, the bow and the pleats, it seems like it's quite a structured design. So, do you think we will need a heavy, medium, or lightweight fabric? Probably a medium to heavy fabric, hey? Let's look at the garment. As you can see, this is definitely a medium to heavy fabric. If a soft and flimsy fabric was used, all the design details would have fallen flat, and you would have small pleats instead of these big, wide ones. Let's look at my second little sketch of a dress. Again, we need to study the sketch and try to determine the fabric. So, if we look at the drape and the volume of this dress, it looks more flowy and soft with lots of gathers at the waist and the sleeve. So, do you think we will need a heavy, medium, or lightweight fabric? it will probably look best if we have a lightweight fabric, right? Let's look at the garment. As you can see, this dress is super feminine, drapey and soft because of the lightweight fabric. This flowy fabric then creates lots of movement, especially in the sleeves. Let's look at my last little example sketch of a dress. Now, what do? Study the design and determine the fabric. When we look at the drape, only the sleeves show some form of drapery and volume, and it looks more stiff than our previous example. The body of the dress is also fitted to the body, which means it is either structured or the fabric is a stretch fabric. Do you agree? So, do you think we will need a heavy, medium or lightweight fabric? And will it be a woven or a stretch fabric? As you can see, this dress is made from a medium to heavyweight fabric to create those incredible frills that create a lot of volume. Whether it is stretch or woven, I'm guessing stretch. With something fitted like this, you need to ask yourself, do I want a simple, clean design without lots of seams and fastenings? Then you can create this design in a stretch fabric. If you want to create this design in a woven fabric, you will need to form the shape by adding seams and darts and an opening like a zip or button so that you can actually get into the dress. That is super important to remember. A stretch garment you can pull over your head and stretch to get into it. A woven non-stretch fabric can't do that, and that is why we need to create openings so that we can get into it. I know it is a lot to take in, and you sometimes wonder, why do I need to know how fabrics are made? But knowledge is power. Build up your knowledge of fabric and its properties to ensure that you always choose the right fabric for your design. With the appropriate fabric, your sketch will transform into an amazing garment and make your vision come to life. Now on to the exciting part, the lesson challenge. I want you to choose a fabric, any fabric, and determine the properties of that fabric. So, the performance, the structure, the drape, the weight, the volume, and the stretch. Once you have gotten to know that fabric, I want you to design a top or a shirt or a jacket, keeping in mind the fabric's properties and characteristics. Please share your work on your favorite social media channel, our fashion Facebook group, and Instagram, and use the hashtag #SureFashionFabric. Have fun, guys! Please don't forget to complete your lesson assignment. This, as you know, does not count for marks, but it will really help you prepare for your Module 2 assignment, which is around the corner. Congratulations, designers, you are done with Lesson 6. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing all of you back here for Lesson 7, Finding the Pattern. Until then, as always, stay fashionable.